Marian Kolodziej was on one of the first transports to enter Auschwitz. He was given number 432. He survived and never spoke of his experience for 50 years. After a serious stroke in 1993, he began rehabilitation by doing pen and ink drawings. Join us today as we speak with Jesuit Father Ron Schmidt, acclaimed filmmaker and producer, about the making of the documentary, The Labyrinth, the Testimony of Marian Kolodziej. Hello and welcome to Catholic Focus. I'm Cheridan Sanders. I'm pleased to welcome to our Salt and Light studios Father Ron Schmidt, who is an acclaimed filmmaker and also the producer on the documentary The Labyrinth, the Testimony of Marian Kolodziej. Thanks for speaking with us today.
Thank you for having me.
How did you get involved in film to begin?
Well, I come from a family that's been involved in the film business for over 100 years, actually. We've just discovered that with my grandfather. And so as people say, it looks like it was in my genes to become involved in filmmaking. But I didn't do that until after I joined the Jesuits late in life. And it came about because I was interested in doing a story about the Jesuits who were killed in El Salvador in 1989. And I had a play written about it, a one-act play, and then we made a short movie about it. And then I just naturally fell into making documentaries and educational films.
So how did your involvement in this documentary come about?
Well, I was making another documentary in Auschwitz about an interfaith retreat that takes place on the grounds of Auschwitz in early November of every year for the past 17 years. We were doing a documentary, a Jesuit from Germany and I were doing a documentary about that retreat. It's an interfaith retreat with Catholics, Jews, Muslims, sometimes Zen Buddhists, and even atheists. And they meditate and pray on the grounds of Auschwitz. And there we met Marian Kolodziej, the artist and Auschwitz survivor. And he took us and showed us his exhibit, The Labyrinth. And I sat down with him as we were doing some filming there and said to him through a translator, had anybody ever done a documentary on you? And he turned to me with a twinkle in his eyes and said, yes, about 10 or 11. And I laughed and I said, well, anybody from the US? And he said, no. And I said, okay, that's fine. And when I got back to the States and we were editing the other film, as I might have mentioned, but I will now, I'm a widower and I have 3 children. And I was working with my son Jason on this other film and he was editing it. And he saw the footage of Marian's drawings. And he turned to me and then he turned to his brother Matthew, who I also work with. And he said, you know, this is the film we need to make. We need to tell this story about Marian and his artwork and his survival at Auschwitz. So that's how it came about.
As you were assembling the team and looking at his artistic vision and thinking about how you were going to translate it into film, what was in your mind at that point?
Well, I think being in the Labyrinth and seeing his artwork is for many people, and for certainly myself, has a profound impact. You see this artwork; it's beautiful in its horror that it depicts, and you're profoundly moved. And when I brought my son Jason and we started filming, he initially walked through the Labyrinth himself, from the opening doors to the final door that you go out. And he said, you know, I want to be able to translate my experience of the Labyrinth as I walked through for the audience. So that was his concept, really, of I will take them through, I will weave through the Labyrinth as you walk through, concentrate on a few of the images of the drawings, and hopefully people will have somewhat the same experience that he did in experiencing the Labyrinth in person.
It's narrated throughout the documentary. How did that come about? Who narrates it? And then, of course, it's accompanied by music. Can you tell us a bit about the composer who put this all together?
Sure. The script, so to speak, where you have the narration, comes from three sources. One source is the interviews, on-camera interviews we did with Marian, and we had translated. He was speaking in Polish. So we have his words, as sometimes he would talk about the drawings, tell us about his life, tell us about how it came about. Then we also had his testimony that he gave to the Auschwitz Museum. They take testimony from all the survivors that they can, and they're in their archives. And then a third source was a book he had made of his drawings, where he had written an introduction. So we had three sources to cut and paste and weave into the film. The music, the composer is Marek Zabrowski. Marek is the head of the Polish Music Center at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And somebody gave me his name, and I called him up and explained what we were doing. And he was very interested in doing the music. He had done some music for films, for David Lynch. Yeah. He's a noted composer and pianist. So I asked him if he would be interested, and he said yes immediately. And what was interesting was that we didn't have a lot of time. We started on a short timeline, mainly because we had to get the movie finished so it could qualify for Oscar consideration. We were told it could qualify for Oscar consideration, but as usual, we had a deadline to get it in and finished. So we told him he only had 3 weeks to compose the music and get it scored, and he accomplished that. No pressure for him, no. He does remind me of the pressure we put him under, but I have been told that that's very common in the motion picture business, that composers get called in at the last minute to do the final cut, so yes.
The film has, as you've mentioned, received quite a bit of critical acclaim. It's been at several film festivals. How has the response been inside of the film industry and outside? What have ordinary people thought about it?
Well, let me talk about inside the industry. Inside the industry was all very favorable. In fact, a film critic who saw 10 minutes of it, Sister Rose Picotti, who's a film critic, for a number of Catholic publications, saw 10 minutes of it and turned to me and said, "Ron, this is Oscar worthy." And I kind of did a double take, and that's what started us to really finish it and get it ready. Another friend of mine, Joe Ferrillo, who's a vice president at CBS and did a lot of Dateline NBC films and documentaries on the Vatican back in the 80s and 90s, said about the same thing. So inside the industry, we've had very good response. People who see it, and audience members I've shown it in a number of places, universities, colleges, high schools, parishes, are all, when people come up to you, are all very touched by it. They get the sense that I think we wanted to accomplish, was that even though this is horrific images that they see and disturbing, description of his experiences and the horrors that he experiences and others experienced in the camp, we hope that they come away with a sense of hope. And that sense of hope comes from the fact that he could do this work and that this work is getting out there and people are seeing it and being touched by it.
We now take a quick look at an excerpt from the documentary.
I was in a situation once, so close to becoming a zombie, that I was afraid that I might drop my bowl and lose my food. My friends helped me hold on to the bowl, so I knew, and everyone did, the importance of the bowl. And you see it in the pictures. It's everywhere. We never parted from our bowls. When soup was served, no one wanted to go first, and no one wanted to go last. The first people in line got only water, because the cook didn't feel like stirring the soup. Those in the middle at least got some beets. Nobody wanted to be at the end of the line, because the dirt from the beets settled to the bottom of the kettle. Our water was so contaminated, it was unfit to drink. So we waited for the rain or snow in order to catch something drinkable or even to wash with. At night, our bowl became a pillow and a toilet. Usually, there was no time to clean it in the morning before the so-called coffee was served. Then it became our wash basin. It was with us at all times, day and night. So the importance of possessing a bowl can't possibly be exaggerated. Whoever lost his bowl basically lost his life. Bowls were precious.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your own experience with the film. What aspect of making the documentary, or even just watching the documentary, has touched you personally?
You know, people ask me that a lot. What has touched me personally? And I think what I mentioned before, one is the horror of the Holocaust. But what touched me personally was the individual human kindness that was expressed periodically during that terrible time. We talked about in the film the bowls, where he was losing strength. He couldn't hold his bowl to get food, and he said some friends held him up to get his food because they didn't want him to lose his bowl. As he said, you lose your bowl, you lose your life. So there was a tenderness there of somebody helping, a human touch, a human reaching out.
The story of Maximilian Kolbe is there as well.
Yes, and the story of Maximilian Kolbe was very inspiring to Marian. As he said, and you'll show the story, I'm sure, a little bit of the story of Maximilian Kolbe, who gave up his life for another inmate. And Kolbe knew he would die because he was exchanging places with this inmate. And he volunteered to do that because the inmate said to the Gestapo or the Nazis, you know, what about my wife and children? And Kolbe stepped forward and said, I'll take his place. An interesting aspect of that is that the Nazis let the man go. What normally would happen, they would just include, instead of 10, they'd take everybody. They'd take Kolbe and make it 11. But they let that man go. But that inspired, as Marian says, that inspired the camp, or at least the people as close, to know that somebody would willingly, voluntarily give up their life for someone else, somewhat like Jesus Christ, just so this man could be free. And ultimately he was freed. He did survive, and was even at the canonization of Kolbe in the Vatican when Kolbe was canonized as a martyr for the faith because of his what he did at the camp.
I'm curious, why did it take him so long to speak about the horrors of Auschwitz? He broke his silence after 50 years.
Well, we find in my study of Auschwitz or the Holocaust or any traumatic event, a wartime event, people really don't want to speak about that. They suppress, repress their memories. Many say, well, why should I speak about that? That was long ago. I think it was so horrific for survivors that they don't speak about it until there is perhaps a traumatic experience. And it's not so unusual that given a traumatic experience like Marian had, a stroke, that in his rehabilitation he had to do something. And it just, we think it sprang from that trauma, the physical trauma, that released these memories and what he had to do. And so he just started drawing, and as you see in the film, he really didn't stop till about 4 months before his death because he could not stop. And I would like to say that he was also inspired by Kolbe. You see that in the film when he says about Kolbe when he has nothing to say to me and I have nothing to say to him, then he'll let me go. And in one of the images, one of the striking images, we talked to him at length. And we were sitting doing an on-camera interview with him. And he started speaking, and he told us in one of the drawings, he pointed to it, it's in the film, but you wouldn't recognize, it's the very last image in the film. He says, you know, when I die, you see that drawing, you see that tunnel there, the white light at the end. That's Kolbe. That's who I'm going to see when I die, the person I'm going to see. He's waiting for me. And that really touched us all. We were touched by that image and by his words that were translated for us. Yeah.
I'm also curious about the acute sense of justice that they talk about in the film with the weighing of the scales. I obviously have never experienced anything like this, so what does that mean? Because I was confused by that.
I think there are two levels that operates at. One, when he talks about the weighing out of the bread, and he said, we finally got our bread ration after it passed through many hands, through the hierarchy of the camp, and they got a pittance. And they weighed it to, and I think they, again, a sense that they had to preserve their humanness. They had to be humane to each other. And a way they could do that and kind of resist what was going on is saying, we will not be reduced to animals, fighting over this pittance of bread. We will divide it up equally. So it was to maintain their humanity. And I think that's an indication throughout the film and throughout his time in the camp. But also an understanding that when you're in very dire situations, imprisoned, tortured, held against your will, where you're not free, as he says, you then really experience injustice. So for many of us, injustice is a concept, and we understand what injustice is. But until you experience it, until you experience real injustice on your own personal level, then you really understand what it means to have things be in balance and just and fair, and the distinction between good and evil. So.
I'm also curious, you come from a long line of filmmakers, and then you transition into the life of the priesthood. How has your experience as a filmmaker impacted your life as a priest and vice versa?
And vice versa. When we started making the Auschwitz retreat film about a retreat at Auschwitz and 5 days, the German filmmaker Christoph Wolff and I said, well, how are we going to do that? What are we going to do? And I said, and we both agreed, that we would use our Ignatian spirituality and say, we know people are changed by retreats. So the idea was, we'll interview them during the course of the retreat, and we will see, in the storytelling way, an arc. They will be changed at the end. And so Ignatian spirituality infuses what I do. My Jesuit priesthood infuses the choices I make and the films that we make, and how we make them and the subject matter. So it may be about social justice, it may be about a retreat, it may be about spirituality, it may be about prayer. But I bring all that I am as a priest and a Jesuit to the filmmaking experience, and it's imbued, I think, in there, many times subconsciously, but in the making of the Auschwitz retreat, we looked at each other and said, oh, that's easy. People will be changed, and they are changed by a retreat. And we hope they're changed by the film The Labyrinth. People do tell us that they have been deeply impacted by the film. You asked that earlier. People just say they, didn't realize how bad it was. Somebody came up to me, a number of people have come up to me and said, I've seen a lot of films. I've seen a lot of documentaries. I've seen about the Holocaust. I've seen black and white photographs of it or documentary footage. But nothing has touched me as deeply as this. And I think because it's a first-hand account, but also the fact that the drawings are so powerful and so meaningful, and they impart a story in their own way, and a power and profundity that you can't get away from.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. How do you see your role in the new evangelization in terms of using your storytelling abilities and your role as a priest into bringing people back to the faith?
Well, I think in terms of helping to bring people back to the faith, as you well know here at Salt and Light, media and visual media is so important. People know through either the internet or through TV and film, they're really impacted by this kind of visual media. Even if it's in short bursts now, whether it's a tweet, and now you can put video, 6-second video on Twitter and that kind of thing. People are really impacted by that. And it's the medium they're used to. So by taking film, documentaries, I think people get a different sense of who they are and what their Catholic faith can be. And I think I see it when they show the films. They say, oh, you know, I didn't know this about Kolodziej, or I didn't know that Polish Catholics were in Auschwitz. I didn't know certain things. And I think even the visuals in the film, the cross crucifixion visuals he talks about on his way to Golgotha, I think this all has an impact on people. And I think it has an impact on people to get them to go deeper into their spiritual lives and say, you know, who am I? What is happening to me? I didn't know this, you know, this existed. I didn't have this sense of hope before, and I think they can move closer to God that way. And what I like to do, you can use the film in its sacramental sense, because you have the breaking of the bread. You have the burial of his friend. You have the confessions that Kolodziej hears. You have the water in the bowls and the washing and the baptism. So there are all sorts of images, very subtle, but if you think about it, very sacramental. And I think especially the sharing of the bread and what it meant, how deep that justice idea went, and how we had to share the bread to survive, to live.
Father Ron, thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We could speak all day.
Yes, we could.
But thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Father Ron Schmidt of Hope Media Productions is a Jesuit priest and acclaimed filmmaker, and he spoke to us today about his latest documentary, The Labyrinth, the Testimony of Marian Kolodziej. Today's footage was provided by December 2nd Productions. For more information on how you can get your DVD copy of The Labyrinth, the Testimony of Marian Kolodziej, visit thelabyrinthdocumentary.com. So that's all for tonight. If you have any questions or thoughts you'd like to share with us, email us, focus@saltandlighttv.org. And that's all for tonight. See you next time.